In the spring of 2009, Dessa Harbor, a woman of 28 with calloused hands and a jaw set like the limestone ridges of the Laurentians, was told that her family's maple farm was no longer her own concern. Not entirely. She was not invited to discuss it. She was not given a choice. She was handed a document in a rented boardroom in a hotel in Tremblant, the kind of room where everything smelled of carpet cleaner and certainty, and a man in a press shirt explained to her what was going to happen to the land her grandmother had tapped for 40 years. Let me tell you about that room. Let me tell you what it felt like to sit in it. The man's name was Mr. Corrigan. He had the smooth, practiced confidence of someone who had delivered unwelcome news so many times that he had stopped noticing it was unwelcome. He sat across a lacquered table with two colleagues and a stack of folders, and he explained that a development group had secured the rights to build a four-season resort on the ridge directly behind Harbor Maple. The hill her grandmother had called Le Dos du Géant, the giant's back, because of the way it curved against the winter sky. The resort would have chalets, a spa, a gondola, a high-end restaurant with floor-to-ceiling views of the valley. It would, Mr. Corrigan assured her, be extraordinary. He said the word extraordinary the way people say it when they mean profitable. Dessa sat with her coat still on. She had driven 3 hours on icy roads to be in this room, and she had not taken her coat off because she did not intend to stay long. Mr. Corrigan's colleagues had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. Mr. Corrigan himself did not. "Now, Miss Harbor," he said, flattening a site plan across the table, a grid of access roads and chalet clusters, and a gondola terminal that sat on paper approximately 40 meters from her sugar bush. "We want to be clear that this is a tremendous opportunity for the region and for you personally." He tapped the plan where her property line was marked in red. "Our group is prepared to make a very fair offer on the harbor parcel. Given the location, we think you'll find it generous. More than generous." He slid a folder across the table. Dessa did not open it. She looked at the site plan. She looked at where the gondola terminal would sit. She looked at the red line that had been drawn across the edge of what had been, since 1961, a working sugar bush with 600 trees her grandmother had selected by hand, one by one. Checking the bark, checking the angle of the light, checking things Dessa was still learning to see. "The farm isn't for sale," she said. Mr. Corrigan blinked. One of his colleagues shifted in his chair. The other studied the ceiling. "Miss Harbor," Mr. Corrigan said, his voice dipping into a register she recognized, the register people use when they are trying to be patient with someone they consider slow. "I want to make sure you understand the scope of what we're building. We'll have construction beginning in May, heavy equipment, blasting on the upper ridge, service roads through the valley. Your operation." He glanced at his notes, and she could see him searching for the word he'd chosen in advance. "Your operation will be significantly impacted regardless. It would be far simpler for everyone if you allowed us to acquire the property. You'd be set. You could find something else, something easier." Dessa looked at him for a moment. Outside the hotel window, the parking lot was full of SUVs from Ontario and Quebec City, their owners inside, somewhere drinking wine and talking about weekend plans. "I'll manage," she said. She stood. She buttoned her coat. She left the folder on the table. She heard him saying something to his colleagues as she pushed through the boardroom door, something short and dismissive. She did not turn around. "Now, let me tell you something about Dessa before I go further, because what comes next doesn't make sense unless you understand where she came from." Dessa had not grown up expecting to run a maple farm. She had grown up helping on one, which is a different thing entirely. She had studied environmental science in Guelph, had spent 2 years working for a conservation trust in New Brunswick, had plans, loose, unmade plans, to go back to school. Then her grandmother, Odette Harbor, had a stroke in the fall of 2007, and Dessa had come home for what she thought would be a month to help get things sorted, to help with the harvest, to help figure out what came next. She never left. It happened gradually, the way most important things do. She would get up at 4 in the morning to check the run lines, and something in the cold and the dark and the drip of sap into the collection tanks would hold her there. She started keeping the books. She started talking to the buyers. She started making decisions, small ones at first, and then larger ones. And she realized at some point that she had stopped thinking of the farm as a temporary responsibility and started thinking of it as hers. Not because her grandmother had asked her to take it, not because she had no other options, because she had walked every row of those 600 trees in every season, and she knew them the way you know a language you were born into. Not from study, but from something older. Her grandmother recovered slowly, partially. She still lived in the farmhouse. She sat on the back porch in the mornings with her coffee and watched Dessa work. It was Odette who had taught her what the trees were really doing, not just producing sap, communicating. Odette had a name for every row. She knew which trees ran early and which ran late. She knew which ones needed to be rested and which ones, if you pushed them, would give you something extraordinary, a syrup so dark and complex it was almost bitter, the kind that made people stop mid-bite and look up from their plates. The trees remember everything, Odette told her once, sitting at the kitchen table cleaning the taps in the off-season. The drought 2 summers ago, the late frost in April, the year the moose came through and rubbed 3 of them raw. They remember. The sap carries it. That's what you're bottling. You're bottling the memory of the land. Dessa had written that down in the back of a notebook. She thought about it often during the 2 years that followed Mr. Corrigan's boardroom, because those 2 years were hard in a way that is difficult to describe without making it sound melodramatic, and it wasn't melodramatic. It was just grinding, ordinary difficulty. The construction on the ridge began in June of 2009, and the valley changed overnight. The mornings that had been bird noise and wind in the maples became diesel engines and the mechanical shriek of excavators. Dust settled on the leaves through July and August. Deer that had moved through the property for years disappeared. Her dog stopped going to the far edge of the sugar bush, where the noise was worst, and Dessa didn't push her. People in town were kind, mostly, but there was a particular kind of kindness that is very close to pity, and she received a lot of that. The woman at the hardware store in St. Faustin told her she was brave. A neighbor offered to put her in touch with a real estate agent just to know your options. Her cousin in Montreal called twice to ask if she'd reconsidered the offer. The implication was always the same. Hold on if you want, but for how long and to what end? The resort opened in December of 2010. It was called Sommet Lumière, a summit of light, which Dessa found either poetic or presumptuous depending on her mood. It had 3 lifts, 42 chalet units, a spa with heated stone floors, and a restaurant on the top level of the main lodge called La Cime, which means the peak, which served a tasting menu that started at $210 a person. The gondola ran from the base lodge to the upper ridge, and from the upper ridge, if you looked south on a clear day, you could see the whole valley below you, and in the valley you could see, very clearly, a patchwork of silver-gray bark and the amber glint of the sugar house roof, Harbor Maple. At first, it was just photographs. Guests on the gondola platform, pointing cameras south, posting pictures online with captions like incredible views in authentic Quebec. The farm was scenery. Dessa was fine with that. She kept working. She kept harvesting. She kept bottling. But the mountain had its own ideas about what was interesting. The guests at Sommet Lumiere were a specific kind of person. They were not people who lacked for comfort. They had spa packages and private chef dinners and après-ski cocktail hours with ice sculptures in the shape of the resort logo. They had everything the resort had designed for them to want, and they kept looking at the valley. Dessa noticed the first one on a Saturday in February, about 6 weeks after the resort opened. She was checking the tap lines on the south side of the bush when she heard the crunch of snow boots on the access road. The kind of boots designed for walking between a chalet and a hot tub, not for walking a kilometer down a country road in February. She looked up. There was a woman, 30-ish, in a white parka, standing at the edge of the property, looking at the trees. "Is this the maple farm?" the woman asked. "It is," Dessa said. I'm sorry, is it strange that I walked down here? I could see it from the gondola and She stopped. She looked at the trees. "I just wanted to see it close." Dessa looked at her for a moment. The woman was not being intrusive. She was being genuinely, almost helplessly, curious. There was something in her face that Dessa recognized. The look of someone who has been surrounded by engineered experiences for a week and has suddenly encountered something that wasn't designed for them. "Come look," Dessa said. She showed her the tap lines. She explained how a single mature maple could produce enough sap in a good spring to fill 40 liters of syrup worth of liquid, and that it would take roughly 40 liters of that liquid to make 1 liter of syrup. The woman did the math and her eyebrows went up. Dessa showed her the sugar house, the wood-fired evaporator, the amber light inside on a gray February morning. She gave her a spoonful of the previous spring's dark reserve syrup, the kind Odette had always held back, the complex one, the one that tasted like late season and cold nights and the particular kind of patience that comes from not rushing. The woman put the spoon in her mouth and was quiet for a long moment. "That is not what I thought maple syrup tasted like," she said. "Most people haven't had real maple syrup," Dessa said. "They've had the bottle. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever offered someone a taste of something and watched the exact moment they understood what they'd been missing?" The woman bought 6 jars before she left. She told her friends at dinner that night. 3 of them came down the next morning. One of them brought his teenage daughter, who spent 45 minutes asking Dessa questions about the trees, about the science of sap, about whether there were schools where you could learn this, whether it was a career, whether people actually did this for a living. Word of mouth in a contained resort environment moves fast. It moves the way smoke moves in a closed room, everywhere, all at once, with no real origin point you can identify. By the 3rd weekend, Dessa had people showing up in groups. She hadn't planned for it. She hadn't advertised anything. She put a hand-lettered sign on the fence post at the road, the kind she used for the annual spring open house. "Sugar Bush Walk, Saturdays, 10 a.m. Bring good boots." That first official Saturday, 11 people came. They were in ski pants and performance layers and expensive sunglasses. They walked the rows of trees with her in complete silence. For the first few minutes, the way people go quiet in churches or old forests, because something about the scale of it, the age of the trees, the patience embedded in the work, demanded it. She talked about her grandmother. She talked about the land. She talked about how the best syrup came from the last week of the season, when the nights were still cold, but the days were warming, when the pressure differential in the trees was highest, when they were pushing hardest. She talked about what Odette had told her about memory, how the sap carried the history of every season the tree had survived. An older man in a red jacket, he told her he was a cardiologist from Ottawa, stood at the base of a 200-year-old rock maple at the far end of the south row. and put his hand on the bark for a long time without saying anything. When he finally turned around, his eyes were wet. "My father had a woodlot," he said, "in New Brunswick. I haven't thought about it in years." Dessa didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Let me stop here, because what happened next is something I want you to understand properly. What Dessa built was not a tourism operation. It was not a strategy. It had no business plan, no consultant, no projection spreadsheet. What Dessa built was an extension of what she had always been doing, caring for trees, caring for the land, and being honest about what that work was and why it mattered. The guests at Sommet Lumiere had paid $1,200 a night to be told that this mountain was exceptional. Dessa was showing them something that was exceptional in a way that no amount of money could manufacture. By the second winter, she had formalized the walks into a program. She had 2 sessions on Saturdays and 1 on Sunday mornings. She kept the group small, 12 people maximum, because she had learned that the experience changed when the group got larger, became more like a tour and less like a conversation. She charged $60 a person. She offered hot tea from a thermos at the end, poured into tin mugs her grandmother had kept in the sugar house for 30 years, and a small jar of the reserve syrup to take home. The waiting list filled within days of posting. She wasn't competing with the resort. She wasn't even thinking about the resort. She was thinking about the trees and the land and the guests who came down the road in their snow boots and left 3 hours later looking like they'd been somewhere important, looking like they'd remembered something. But the resort noticed. The management team at Sommet Lumiere began to observe, sometime in the second year, a pattern in the guest data that didn't match their projections. Afternoon ski revenue was down. Spa bookings on Saturday mornings were underperforming. The high-margin lunch service at La Cime was consistently half empty. Guests were somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't on the resort map, and they were staying there for hours. The general manager, a man named Mr. Pelletier, who had previously run a resort in Banff and had opinions about guest behavior, sent a member of the events team down to the farm incognito on a Saturday morning in January. She came back that afternoon and sat in his office. "They're walking through trees," she said, "for 2 hours in the cold, and then they're standing in a barn drinking tea from tin cups." Mr. Pelletier waited. "And they're happier than anyone I've seen in 3 weeks of watching guests on our property." He was quiet for a moment. "What are they paying?" $60. He thought about that. His spa charged $400 for a 90-minute treatment. His restaurant charged $210 for dinner. He was losing afternoon ski revenue, which he estimated at several $100s per guest per afternoon, to a woman charging $60 to walk through a forest. He went back to his data. He looked at online reviews. He found that Harbor Maple had begun appearing in travel reviews for Sommet Lumiere, not as a nearby attraction, as the reason people chose to return. One review, it had been shared 47 times, read, "The resort is beautiful, but it's the maple farm in the valley that made this trip. If you go on a Saturday morning. Block 3 hours. Don't skip it." Another, "Honestly, we almost canceled our second day of skiing because we wanted to go back." Another, "I've been to Tremblant a dozen times. This was the first time I felt like I was actually somewhere." Mr. Pelletier called Mr. Corrigan. Let me tell you what happened to Mr. Corrigan's access road. When the construction crew had built the service road in 2009, it cut across the lower edge of the valley and passed within sight of Harbor Maple's north fence. It was technically entirely on resort land, but it was also the road guests were using to walk down to the farm, on foot, in ski boots, from the gondola base. By the third winter, the resort's facilities team had to add a dedicated path, a proper one, graveled and signed, because guests were wearing a rut into the slope trying to get to Dessa's property. They also had to station someone at the gondola base on Saturday mornings to direct people, because guests kept asking gondola operators how to get to the maple farm, and the operators didn't have an official answer. The resort spent money building a path to a farm they had once tried to buy and eliminate. Now let me tell you about a morning in late February of the fourth winter. Dessa was at the evaporator when she heard the knock on the sugar house door. She thought it was a guest who'd come early. She wiped her hands on her canvas apron and went to the door. It was Mr. Corrigan. He looked older. He was wearing a resort-branded jacket now, instead of a pressed shirt, which made him seem smaller somehow. He looked at the evaporator, at the amber light, at the steam rising from the pans, and his face did something she hadn't seen it do in the boardroom 4 years earlier. It went uncertain. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She stepped back and let him in. She poured him a cup of tea. He wrapped his hands around the tin mug and looked at the evaporator for a long time. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "We've been watching the numbers. What you've done here, we didn't see it coming. We didn't think it was possible." He paused. "I didn't think it was possible." Dessa waited. "We'd like to propose a partnership," he said. "A formal one. Include a morning at Harbor Maple as part of our premium guest package. We'd handle the booking, you'd set the terms, you keep full control of your operation. We'd—" He stopped. He seemed to be choosing his words with unusual care. "We made assumptions about what guests were coming here for, about what this valley was. We thought we were the destination." He looked out the small sugar house window toward the ridge where the gondola moved in the gray morning light. "I think we were wrong about that." Dessa poured herself tea. She sat down on the bench across from him. The evaporator hummed. The steam rose. "The offer you made me," she said. "In the boardroom. In 2009, he nodded. "I didn't open the folder." "I know," he said. "I heard. Do you know why?" He shook his head. She looked out the same window he'd been looking at. "Because the number in the folder wasn't what the farm is worth. It was what you could afford to pay. Those aren't the same thing." He was quiet for a while. "No," he said. "They're not." She thought about the partnership for 3 weeks. She consulted her grandmother, who sat on the back porch with her coffee and listened without saying much, and then said, "You decide. You know these trees better than I do now." That settled something in Dessa she hadn't known needed settling. She negotiated the terms herself, without a lawyer, because she trusted her own instincts, and because she had learned, over 4 years, that the person who knows exactly what they have is always in the stronger position. The resort would direct premium guests to Harbor Maple for Saturday morning walks. Booking would go through Dessa's own system, not the resort's. Prices would be set by her. Lassim's menu would include a Harbor Maple feature, the reserve syrup, served simply with good bread, properly credited, no modifications, no rebranding. A small sign at the gondola base would direct guests to the farm with her name on it. She signed the agreement in the same hotel in Tremblant where Mr. Corrigan had slid the unopened folder across the table 6 years before. That was 15 years ago now. Harbor Maple still runs 12 people per walk, 2 walks per Saturday, 1 on Sunday mornings. The waiting list for the reserve syrup, the dark, complex, slow-season batch, now extends 14 months. She stopped taking new names on the list 2 years ago. The people already on it will get their jars. That is enough. The sugar house has not changed. The evaporator is the same one her grandmother bought in 1988. The tin mugs are the same ones from the shelf. Sommet Lumiere has changed ownership twice. The current ownership group's most expensive package, $4,000, 5 nights, includes 2 guaranteed spots in a Saturday morning walk at Harbor Maple. Their marketing materials describe it as the soul of the valley, which is the same thing they used to call their gondola ride. The path the resort built to the farm is still there, paved properly now, with good drainage because so many people walk it. There is a modest wooden sign at the top where it meets the gondola plaza. It says, "To Harbor Maple, 900 hours, 2 hours, because nobody leaves in less." Dessa is in her 40s now. Her grandmother, Odette, passed 3 winters ago, in the farmhouse, in her own bed, with the window cracked because she liked to hear the trees. She left the farm to Dessa in writing, though the writing was unnecessary by that point. On the morning of the first tap of each new season, late February, early March, whenever the nights are still cold enough and the days have just begun to warm, Dessa walks the rows alone before anyone else is up. She checks the trees the way Odette taught her. She puts her hand on the bark. She listens. She has a niece now, 12 years old, who started coming on weekends 2 springs ago. Dessa has given her a small notebook, unlined, with a pencil tucked in the spine. She's told her to write down what she notices. Not what she's supposed to notice, but what actually catches her eye, what makes her stop, what makes her put her hand on the bark. Last March, the girl stopped in front of the oldest tree in the south row, the one the cardiologist from Ottawa had stood at, the one that's been tapped since the 1970s, and she pressed her ear to the trunk and stood there for a long time. "Can you hear something?" Dessa asked. The girl thought about it. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe. It's like it's breathing." Dessa handed her the pencil. The trees remember. The sap carries the memory. The land does not forget who has cared for it, not in a season, not in a decade, not in a lifetime. The men in the boardroom came and saw property. They saw an obstacle. They drew a red line across a map and thought they were drawing the future. They were wrong. The future was in the trees. It always had been, and it moves now in a girl with a notebook, standing in the snow in the early morning, learning to listen to something older than any resort that could ever be built on the ridge above her.